all this tremendous learning of the classical world was destroyed by the Christians, that Christianity was responsible.
I don't think the Christians did it, and I definitely don't think the Muslims did it, but they also have been fingered as culprits.
Yeah,
so
there's lots of stuff on the internet saying that they're the bad guys in the story.
Right. So this is even more improbable.
I love Alexandria. We're often asked on The Rest is History, where would you most like to go back to? And I love that Alexandria is this syncretic place. It's partly Greek, it's partly Egyptian. So let's talk a little bit. It's founded by Alexander himself, isn't it? I mean, that's the legend, at least. Yeah.
This is in 331 BC. He's conquered most of the Near East. He's conquered Egypt. He's been crowned in Memphis, which is the ancient capital of Egypt, as pharaoh. But he wants a city that can control Egypt from the coast and obviously have shipping links to the Mediterranean world beyond. And he chooses this site. It's a kind of narrow bar of land between the Mediterranean Sea and a lake called Mareotis. And it provides a great complex of deep water harbours. And that's the key reason that he chooses it. It is a landscape of absolutely dazzling artificiality. So it's a kind of grid system of the kind that you get in New York, all laid out personally by Alexander. And after Alexander's death, it gets appropriated by his childhood friend and lieutenant Ptolemy, who grabs Alexander's body, brings it to Alexandria, buries it there. So the tomb of Alexander is a kind of marker of Ptolemy's claim to be the true successor of the great conqueror. It's the first city to have numbered addresses, which I think is a kind of wonderful detail. It had slot machines, it had automatic doors, it had international banks. So it's an incredible place. It's a place of wonders, and the wonders, in a sense, have to be built partly because Ptolemy is trying to establish his very parvenu regime as the inheritor both of the pharaonic greatness of Egypt and of the great empire conquered by Alexander, but also because as an upstart city, it needs to attract people and it needs to have things that people want to come and see. And so it's a little bit, I think, like kind of Dubai or somewhere like that.
I was about to say it's like a Dubai, or it's like it's got a little bit of Las Vegas about it. So it's all quite ersatz, but because it lasts for centuries. So at that point, it's not really ersatz. I mean, it's its own thing, but it's also got the slight air of one of those planned capitals like Brasilia or somewhere, hasn't it?
Yes. There's this sense that by investing in culture, you are boosting the prestige of your city.
Oh, yes,
and
definitely.
He wants the greatest conglomeration of texts and philosophers that money can buy him.
It's worth saying about Ptolemy, by the way, he's a clever man. He writes a memoir, doesn't he, of his time with Alexander. I mean, he is a literate, shrewd, intelligent man. So there is maybe it's not just, you don't have to be cynical about it. I mean, maybe he probably really does like the idea of scholarship and learning and all these things, don't you think?
I don't think that he would see any tension between it. I mean, he doesn't see that promoting his own brand and his own city is anything to apologize for. I mean, he's all in favor of that. But I think he genuinely does believe in this kind of radical concept of learning for its own sake.
The Library of Alexandria, I mean, people have this fantasy of it, don't they, as the repository of all the world's wisdom. All kinds of scientific discoveries are happening thanks to the books in the library. The scholars who are working in the museum are pushing the boundaries of knowledge. And then actually there's this very common view, which you see repeated in kind of popular histories and things, which is that with the loss of the Library of Alexandria, which was destroyed for reasons that we will go on to discuss, the world was plunged into a darkness. The cause of science was set back. How much truth is there in this? And I can kind of guess what your answer is going to be.
This idea that the Library of Alexandria is a kind of scientific research center, that it's kind of MIT or, Silicon Valley or something like that.
Yeah, the University of Wolverhampton.
Not going that far. The truth about the Library of Alexandria is that its focus is overwhelmingly literary and Greek. And they're anxious, I think, that amid all the wars that have plagued Greece for the past 200 years, the previous 200 years, there's every possibility that these texts will be lost. And so that's an absolutely kind of key part of it. And this combines with the obsession of the Ptolemies for collecting. Because once you have the kind of ideal that you're going to get as many books as possible, that's tremendously fun if you're a king with very, very deep pockets. And so the Ptolemies are sending agents out across the Greek world, particularly to Athens, particularly to Rhodes, where they have the largest book markets. There are kind of almost certainly apocryphal stories that Ptolemy III wants the original copies of the plays of the three greatest Athenian tragedians, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. And he asks the Athenians, and the Athenians say no, and he keeps pestering them. And finally, the Athenians say, okay, but you'll have to pay an absolutely kind of crippling deposit because we don't trust you. So Ptolemy hands over the deposit and then just pockets the tragedies. And the Athenians are left with the deposit. So, I mean, this story develops clearly out of the sense that there is something faintly maniacal about the determination of the Ptolemies and his librarians to get all these texts. And what they do then, having got all these texts, it seems, is basically to establish the definitive editions of pretty much all the classical texts that we have today.
So your Homers and Herodotuses and things.
So that is a very, very great achievement. I mean, it's an absolutely astonishing achievement, but it's not perhaps on a level with curing cancer or building space rockets, which is really what I think people want to believe that was going on in the library. And the truth is that there are kind of amazing discoveries and breakthroughs at the library that are not to do with with literature. So the classic example of this is the calculation, to an astonishing degree of accuracy, of the circumference of the Earth, which is done by a scholar called Eratosthenes. It's really important to emphasize that for the Greeks, theory always triumphs over experiment. And there's a line in Plato's Republic that I always think of in this context, where Plato says, when we're looking at astronomy, we must approach it as we approach geometry, by way of kind of working out problems and ignore what's in the sky. So in other words, the maths of astronomy is what really matters. The pinpricks of light in the sky, that's kind of completely irrelevant.
But all of that said, Tom, they do have coin-operated slot machines. They do have automatic doors. They do have
steam engines.
Yeah, steam engines, exactly. Practical
But
inventions.
What they don't do is apply any of those to what we would recognize, say, as industrial policy.
Yeah.
The steam engines are being used to power various gizmos in temples. They're not being used to power railway trains that can be laid out over the desert. To go and attack enemies or anything like that.
No.
So there is
those Ptolemaic armored trains would have been brilliant, though.
But that's not the Library of Alexandria is not a great center of technology. That is not what it's about. And the other myth is that it is universal in the sense of aspiring to contain all the wisdom of the world. Really, its focus is Greek. The other great question is what happens to it? Where does it go? And that is usually framed as who destroys it. So a favorite candidate, as you'll know, Dominic, because you write about it in your book on Cleopatra, is Julius Caesar.
Exactly.
So are you convinced by that?
No, I think it's clearly I think most scholars who've written about this think it's Caesar causes a fire. There's no doubt about that. When he's trapped in Alexandria, having visited he's visited Egypt as part of his war against Pompey. He's installed himself. He's taken possession of the palace quarter. He ends up being shacked up with Cleopatra. He's fighting against her brother, isn't he? Ptolemy. Of course, they're all called Ptolemy. And in the course of this, there is a big fight down at the harbour. And Caesar, it seems, if you're to believe the accounts, sets fire to his own ships to stop the enemy getting hold of them. And in the course of that, the fire spreads through the warehouses, from the ships to the warehouses, and that books there are damaged. But I mean, as you will know, Tom, the library is not at the docks. So it's conceivable the fire spread, but it would have had to have spread a hell of a long way. Catherine Nixie basically argued all this tremendous learning of the classical world was destroyed by the Christians, that Christianity was responsible for plunging the world into a darkening age, as she calls it.
Yeah, so just, on that, we have 5 accounts of the destruction of the Serapeum. So it is one of the best authenticated episodes in the whole history of Alexandria, but none of them mention the destruction of a library. To the degree that classical texts have survived, it's down to the efforts of Christian copyists, Christian scribes. Without them, we would have nothing. So I don't think the Christians did it, and I definitely don't think the Muslims did it, but they also have been fingered as culprits.
Yeah.
So the story
There's lots
goes
of stuff on
that,
the internet saying that they're the bad guys in the story.
Right. So this is even more improbable. But the story is that the Arabs sweep into Egypt. They conquer it. They lay siege to Alexandria. They capture it. The commander of the Arabs, Ammar, writes to Omar, the caliph, and says, well, you've got all this, this great city. There's this enormous library. It's full of books. What should we do with them? And he waits, and then Omar's reply comes back. If the content of the books you mention is in accordance with the Book of Allah, we may do without them, for in that case, the Book of Allah more than suffices. If, on the other hand, they contain matter not in accordance with the Book of Allah, there can be no need to preserve them. Proceed then and destroy them.
We have no need of other books.
Yeah. And I think the reason why it's so clearly not true. This is not, again, the Muslims had huge respect for the legacy of Greek philosophy. The reason that this survives is that it's kind of in accordance with what people who are very hostile to institutional religion like to imagine about it.
Of course.
That it's all bigots who have no time for anything other than their own holy books. So I think it's a kind of Enlightenment myth, really. And actually, the person who comments most wonderfully on this is Gibbon. So Gibbon says, I sincerely regret the more valuable libraries which have been involved in the ruin of the Roman Empire, but when I seriously compute the lapse of ages, the waste of ignorance, and the calamities of war, our treasures, rather than our losses, are the object of my surprise.
So don't mourn what we've lost, but celebrate what we've retained. I mean, that's actually quite a nice message, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very un-Gibbonian, given that he's normally so skeptical and so sort of...
Yeah. Well, no, I think... the Decline and Fall is a great monument to the amount of texts that are there. And I guess that Gibbon is, that's what he is expressing.
Thank God I don't have to do any more reading. That's what he's thinking.
Yes.
The sources are necessarily limited. Thank goodness.
But to repeat, again, what we said at the beginning, I think the fact that the Library of Alexandria is no longer there is precisely what gives it its potency as a kind of mythic symbol of libraries.
Thank you so much for that, Tom.
Hurrah for libraries, basically, because without them, we wouldn't be able to do this podcast.
No, especially the Bodleian Library. Right, we'll see you all next time, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.